Hello everyone, and welcome. Life moves fast, and most days feel full from beginning to end. That is one of the reasons I created this channel, to share a quiet moment, step away from the noise for a little while, and get lost in a story together. Thank you for being here. It truly means a lot to have you visit my channel. If this story speaks to you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you have any feedback on the voice narration, please share that too, because your opinion really helps me make these stories better. Now, let's leave the outside world behind for a little while and begin the story. Rhea Marlowe did not look up when the dock clerk said, "You should sign now," before the priority lane closes. She was standing in Cargo Control 6 on Veyra Transfer Ring, a civilian rescue hub built around an aging orbital spine above the pale green world of Sealand Vale. Rhea was the chief contract recovery officer for Earth Freight Accord, and she had come to Veyra for one reason only. She was there to close out the last lawful transfers on 3 failing relief routes, bring Earth's crews out without panic, and stop a collapsing system from pinning its own guilt on humanity. The pressure around her had been building for months. Earth had carried too many unprofitable aid lanes, absorbed too many emergency losses, and buried too many dead under the polite language of interstellar accounting. The ports of the wider alliance kept calling Earth flexible, and Rhea had learned that flexible usually meant cheap, quiet, and willing to bleed in public without sending the bill. The clerk slid a glowing pad closer across the console. "Routine amendment," he said. "Purely technical." Rhea read the first 3 lines and felt the familiar cold clarity settle behind her ribs. The amendment turned discretionary emergency support into continuing obligation. In plain terms, it meant that if Earth rescued 1 failing shipment today, Earth could be forced to rescue the next 10 tomorrow, and every power in the corridor would pretend that had always been the contract. "Not technical," she said. The clerk gave a careful smile. "With respect, Officer Marlowe, the children in the Neris. Clinics will not care about your wording dispute." Rhea finally looked at him. He was young, polished, and wearing the narrow dark sash of Veyra Station administration. He had probably practiced this tone in a mirror, half apology and half accusation. "They will care," she said, "if your office uses them as leverage." Behind the control glass, freight carriers drifted through docking lanes like patient metal whales. One of them, the Ice Glass Mercy, carried temperature-sensitive medicine for 3 habitat settlements in the Neris Belt. Its window to unload was already narrowing. A second vessel, the grain hauler North Candle, had already been bumped twice from the approach queue. It was run by an Earth crew under contract extension, and it was still waiting for clearance. Rhea had the ring map open in one corner of her display and the ledger of unpaid risk transfers in another. The 2 screens told the same story from different angles. Someone was preparing a disaster and arranging the paperwork first. She touched her comm. "Lena, confirm lane assignments." A woman's voice came back over static. "Nothing matches the published board. Dock priority has been rewritten twice in the last 17 minutes. They're pushing Mercy to cold standby and leaving us to absorb the spoilage risk." "Recorded. Already doing it." The clerk's polite smile thinned. "Officer Marlowe, delay here will cost lives." Rhea set the pad aside. "Then your supervisors should stop manufacturing delay." He drew in a breath as if to object. At that exact moment, every cargo display in Control 6 flashed amber and then red. A warning tone sounded across the room. It was not a hull breach. It was not weapons. It was thermal instability in medical storage. The Ice Glass Mercy had been left too long in the outer queue. Its coolant stack was now spiking. For half a second, the room froze. Then everyone started speaking at once. Rhea moved first. "Open emergency, lane 7. Transfer Mercy under humanitarian override." The clerk stared at her. "Only Port Authority can authorize dash. Then tell Port Authority the medicine dies in 18 minutes. After that, you can all explain to the Galactic Council why." A station built for relief work chose Q politics over pediatric medicine. The clerk swallowed. Rhea was already moving toward the wider operations deck, where station managers, tug pilots, and route monitors sat beneath a sweeping window full of slow-turning traffic. She could feel eyes on her as she crossed the floor. Human. Avani. Taith. Coral. None of that mattered as much as the one fact that did. 3 settlements were waiting on those containers, and someone on Veyra believed Earth would either save the shipment for free or take the blame for letting it die. That was the shape of the trap. Not a dramatic order, not an open insult, a delayed lane, a dying cargo hold, and a signature demanded under moral blackmail. This was how large systems fed on weaker partners, quietly, administratively, one crisis at a time. By the time Rhea reached the main deck, Lena Ortega's had already broken station protocol and pulled the thermal profile onto the central wall. Lena was Earth Freight Accord's senior route analyst on Veyra. She was short, dark-haired, exhausted, and incapable of watching incompetence in silence. Coolant decay at 6% per minute, Lena said. If we do nothing, the top-tier biologics fail first. Naris 3 loses most of its neonatal reserve. Rhea turned to the elevated glass booth where Director Neril Quill of Veyra Port Authority stood with 2 advisors and the expression of a man hoping the crisis would somehow sort itself into someone else's liability. Director, Rhea said, loud enough for the deck to hear, open lane 7. Quill folded his hands behind his back. That lane is reserved for Alliance diplomatic courier traffic. There is no diplomatic courier inbound. There may be. Rhea held his gaze. 3 settlements have live patients waiting on that cargo. Quill's feathers along his narrow jaw shifted, a sign of discomfort in his species. Then perhaps Earth should have considered continuity obligations before announcing route suspension. There it was. Too soon for subtlety now. He wanted witnesses. Rhea let the silence sit just long enough. Then she said, Earth announced a lawful pause after 7 years of carrying losses. Your consortium signed, used, and never settled. We are here to complete handover, not to be extorted under the cover of sick children. Every face on the deck turned toward Quill. He tried to recover with dignity. Your language is unfortunate. Your cue is fatal. For a moment, Rhea thought he might still refuse just to preserve authority. Then a second alarm chimed from the wallboard. Coolant redundancy had failed, and the medicine was entering the final margin. Quill flicked one hand at a controller. Open lane 7. The operations floor exploded into motion. Tug channels lit up. Guidance lights shifted. Somewhere beyond the glass, the ice glass Mercy altered course with painful slowness as maneuver jets flared pale blue against the dark. Rhea exhaled once. Only once. That was the medicine, not the rest, because she knew what opening lane 7 would cost. It would come out of Earth's emergency reserve. The port would call it a technical exception. The consortium would later call it a voluntary intervention. Then the same people who delayed the shipment would point to the rescue as proof that Earth had accepted continuing responsibility. Lena stepped closer. If we use reserve authority here, our recovery claim gets uglier. Our recovery claim was already ugly. That is not what I meant. Rhea knew exactly what she meant. Every time Earth did the decent thing, the paper trail got rewritten to look like compliance. A new voice cut into her comm. Officer Marlowe, this is Captain Harlan Cove of the Tug Archer Saint. We are still holding outside safe vector. Port control is denying us inner access to the grain hauler North Candle. Her crew is signaling manual life support cycling. Rhea closed her eyes for one heartbeat. There was the second blade. While everyone watched the medicine crisis, an Earth crew was being trapped in the outer work ring where life support ran on local permission codes. Reason for denial? Rhea asked. Port control cites traffic compression and safety review. Safety review from whom? A pause. No answer. Lena looked up sharply. They're splitting you. Rhea nodded. Now the trap was fully visible. One crisis was public and emotional. The other was technical and easy to deny. Save the medicine, and Earth would be accused of performing heroics to justify contract demands. Save the crew first, and Earth would be blamed for dead children. Stand down, and Earth would be branded cruel. No version of inaction existed, only different shapes of sacrifice. She touched her comm again. Captain Cove, hold position. No será de Ingres. Keep recording every denial. That crew won't last forever. I know. The words tasted worse than anger. She had spent most of her adult life inside freight corridors, emergency schedules, arbitration rooms, and quiet accident reports. She knew how systems failed. They rarely fail by accident. They failed through permission, through delay, and through the careful placement of cost onto those least able to refuse it. And too often for too long, that had meant humanity. The ice-class Mercy came in hard on the emergency lane, guided by tugs whose pilots would later deny they had ever received priority instructions from Earth. Containers began dropping into controlled unloading arms. Medical teams rushed forward. No one cheered. Relief on a working station was never cinematic. It was a narrow escape followed by paperwork. Quill descended from the booth at last, his long coat trailing. "You forced an override," he said. "You forced the need for one. I reject that characterization. You can reject gravity too, Director. It will still break things." He leaned closer, keeping his voice low. "You're leaving out the larger context. Route suspensions create panic. Panic creates pressure. Pressure requires flexible station management." Rhea understood him then with perfect clarity. Quill was not improvising. He was executing a logic already blessed above his level. Keep Earth in motion through controlled instability. If they resist, make the resistance look like negligence. She said, "Who asked you to make this ugly?" His eyes flickered. Just enough. That was all she got. Before she could push further, Lena's console shrilled. "Rhea, network burst on station, civilian feeds. Someone is pushing a narrative package." The main display changed. Commentary, clips, and translated captions spilled across the public channel. Grainy footage showed the ice-glass Mercy waiting in the outer queue. A close crop showed Rhea refusing to sign the amendment pad. Then the headline rolled out. "Earth halts relief lane during medical shortage." A second line followed. "Human contract officer blocks station compromise." It was too clean, too fast, prepared in advance. Lena swore softly. They had this loaded before the alarm. Rhea watched the lie spread and felt something inside her settle colder and harder. This was no local dispute. Someone had planned the image of Earth before the crisis began. Captain Cove called again. "Officer Marlowe, North Candle crew, condition deteriorating." One engineer collapsed during manual vent control. Rhea turned from the feed. "Give me emergency labor access on Outer Ring," Quill said. "Those codes require port sanction." Rhea did not even face him when she answered. "Then sanction them." "You are in no position to demand dash," she turned now. "Director, hear me carefully. If that crew dies while you play for leverage, I will preserve every delay order, every lane revision, every denial code, and I will carry them personally to any chamber in the galaxy that still remembers the difference between governance and predation." It was not a speech. It was an administrative threat delivered in the voice of a tired woman who had no time left for diplomacy. For the first time since the alarms began, Quill looked less offended than worried. He made the call. Access opened. Captain Cove's tug burned for the Outer Ring. Rhea knew it still would not save her. On Veyra, the medicine would live. The crew might live. But the narrative had already left the station, and in interstellar politics, a lie given a 2-hour lead could outlive 10 years of honest labor. She looked once more at the public feed, then at the ledger of unpaid losses still open on her wrist display. Lives on one screen, numbers on the other. The galaxy liked to pretend those were different things. By the end of the day, Rhea Marlowe would be forced to prove that they never had been. 3 hours later, the medicine was in motion again, distributed under emergency escort to waiting civilian transfer craft. The North Candle crew had been pulled from the Outer Ring in stages, two conscious for drifting, and one with breathing support clamped to his face while station medics argued about liability release forms over his stretcher. Rhea made them sign first and argue later. That alone would have been enough for a terrible shift. What made this one dangerous was what Lena found next. "Rhea," she said from a side console in the operations suite, "look at this." Rhea stepped over empty stimulant cups and half-packed document cases. The suite had become a war room without anyone officially naming it one. Harlan Cove was there now, in person, grease still on his cuffs from the Archer's Saint. So was Dr. Seema Vey, the lead physician from the nearest clinic flotilla, who had stayed because she did not trust the station's public statements. 2 junior auditors from Earthside administration had joined by secure channel. Everyone looked as if the day had become longer than the station's artificial light cycle. Lena enlarged 2 timelines. On the left were the lane revisions that had pushed the ice-glass Mercy outward and held the North Candle in an unsafe position. On the right were premium corridor reservations filed not by Veyra itself, but by secondary subsidiaries tied to the consortium of 9 ports. Rhea studied the entries. Those courier slots were ghost reservations. Exactly, Lena said. They blocked real relief traffic with premium allocations for ships that never intended to dock. Harlan leaned over the display. So the congestion was built on purpose. Dr. Seema added, and then they could blame you for failing to navigate it. Rhea looked closer. Most of the ghost reservations have been signed through management shells, the kind large consortium blocks used when they wanted distance from dirty work. But one item among the signatures stood out. It sat under a compliance review layer. She zoomed in. What is that? Harlan asked. Rhea knew the format before Lena answered. Trade Oversight Authorization. Council grade. The room went still. Dr. Seema folded her arms. Explain this as if I am normal. Rhea almost smiled. It means somebody above station level helped create false traffic, enough to delay medicine and isolate an Earth crew. And if I had signed that amendment, the same people could later say Earth had accepted responsibility for fixing the emergency they engineered. Seema's eyes narrowed. Why? Because the relief network is weaker than they admit, Rhea said. And if Earth pulls back lawfully, a lot of powerful people need someone to blame before the public asks why their stability depended on unpaid human labor. No one spoke for several seconds. Harlan finally muttered, That is uglier than I thought. It usually is, Rhea said. A secure line pulsed on her wrist display. Earth Command. She took the call in a smaller office at the back of the suite, where the walls hummed softly from failing climate control. Admiral June Mercer appeared as a clean blue projection above a desk. He was not in uniform, which meant the matter had already moved beyond transport management into political handling. Officer Marlowe, he said. Admiral, I have your preliminary packet. Then you know Veyra manufactured the Q collapse. I know enough to say you're no longer dealing with Veyra alone. That was clear when the civilian feed package launched before the alarms. Mercer gave a short nod. It has already reached 6 regional debate channels and 2 council observer streams. The phrase human suspension opportunism is trending in 3 translation clusters. Rhea leaned back against the desk. They wrote the accusation before the event. Yes. Do we have political cover? Mercer did not answer quickly enough. That told her as much as any words. We have concern, he said at last. Not cover. Of course not. Earth had grown in dignity, but not yet in voting mass. Too useful to ignore. Too inconvenient to indulge. Mercer went on. If the consortium of 9 ports pins corridor instability on Earth, several alliance blocks can argue for continuity enforcement. That would lock us into emergency service under revised terms. Indenture with paperwork. Mercer allowed himself one dry breath that might have been agreement. Colorful. But yes. Rhea crossed her arms. Then we do not let them frame it. You may not have that choice for long. A formal review request has already been filed. By whom? The public sponsor is Port Director Quill. And the real sponsor? Mercer's face hardened. Trade Auditor Soreth Vel has signaled interest. Rhea stared at him. She knew the name. Most people in freight corridors did. Soreth Vel was not famous in the theatrical sense. He was worse. He was a respected architect of compliance language, a man whose reports could turn exploitation into efficiency and human loss into acceptable externality. Mercer read her face. You understand? Yes. He will not shout. He will not insult humanity in public. He will say Earth acted within its rights, but also within its obligations. He will make the argument sound reasonable. Reasonable arguments can still be built on theft. They can, Mercer said. The challenge is that chambers like reason more than truth if reason comes packaged cleanly. Rhea looked at the office wall, at the faint reflection of herself in the metal. 38. Sleepless. Hair pulled back too tight since morning. Ink marks on the side of one hand from touching hard copy manifests while the station system buckled around them. Not a diplomat. Not a senator. Not anyone a chamber expected to fear. Maybe that would help. What do you want from me? She asked. The same thing I wanted when I promoted you to contract recovery 3 years ago. I want the original shape of the thing. No rhetoric. No panique. Find where the burden was shifted, who approved the shift, and what they expected you to sign away. Rhea nodded once. I'm already doing that. Mercer's expression changed, just a little. Softer now. There's one more factor, he said. You authorized emergency expenditure from the widow and dependent reserve. Rhea felt the words like a physical tap against the sternum. So he knew. The reserve was exactly what it sounded like. A protected pool built partly by Earth Freight Accord and partly by civilian contribution, meant to support families of lost crew and long-haul workers killed under contract. Yes, she said. You understand how that will look if it becomes public. Yes. That fund is politically sacred on Earth. I know. Mercer studied her in silence. Then, quietly, he said, Why did you use it? Because a child needed medicine more urgently than a lawn needed purity. Because North Candle's crew could not breathe on principle. Because all the clean choices had already been removed. Instead, she said, because there was no other liquid reserve left with response authority fast enough to matter. Mercer closed his eyes briefly. I suspected as much. I can repay the fund through recovery if we win. If we lose. Rhea did not answer. Mercer straightened. Preserve the chain. Every code, every queue revision, every suppressed invoice. Keep the original logs off Station Mirror if you can. I can. You may not remain on Veyra long enough to complete extraction. There it was. When is the summons? She asked. Not issued yet, but it is coming. And if it comes? Mercer looked at her, as if considering whether to pretend choice still existed. He decided not to insult her. If it comes, Marlowe, you will go. The line ended. She stood alone in the little office for several seconds before returning to the operations suite. Nobody asked what Earth Command had said. They could read enough from her face. Harlan pushed away from the wall. Bad. Predictable. That is not an answer. No, she said. It is the one we have. Lena turned back to the logs. Then we move faster. They did. For the next 7 hours, they rebuilt the day in layers. First, the obvious line. Ghost reservations. Delayed lanes. A public feed package prepared before the incident. That proved manipulation, but not enough to beat someone like Sorith Vel. So Rhea went deeper. She pulled 7 years of supplemental freight actions on the 3 threatened corridors. Every time Earth crews had unloaded outside paid scope. Every time emergency escorts had been flown without full reimbursement. Every time hull where coolant stress or lost time had been quietly absorbed by human operators because the cargo at stake was considered morally impossible to refuse. At first, it was just ugly. Then it became something worse. The deeper they went, the clearer the pattern became. Earth had not merely carried freight. Earth had become the hidden support beam for a system that charged one price on paper and survived on another in real life. A station on the 4th corridor stopped receiving dialysis compounds on time. Earth emergency runners patched it. A crop failure on a mining moon created temporary food insecurity. Earth extended grain lanes at a loss. A coalition d'Oxtrike slowed Alliance Freterre. Earth crews took overflow under what the paperwork called a temporary civic exception. Temporary had become seasonal. Seasonal had become structural. The words on the contracts never changed enough to alarm politicians. The losses simply moved elsewhere. They settled into maintenance deficits, memorial funds, fatigue rotations, and family support programs until the real price disappeared from alliance ledgers and reappeared inside human lives. Harlan sat back from one of the screens and whistled low. This is not bad management. No, Rhea said. It is the system. Dr. Seema read through casualty tags attached to 3 old rescue runs. How many human crews died holding this network together? Rhea checked, because numbers matter more when spoken cleanly. On the 3 routes under current dispute, 27 confirmed over 7 years. More if you count contracted civilian auxiliaries. Seema lifted her gaze. And this was called efficient. Flexible, Lena said bitterly. No one laughed. Near midnight station time, a message arrived from North Candle's recovered engineer, Tomas Vin, still under observation in Medbay. He wanted to make a statement. Rhea met him there. The Medbay was brighter than any place deserved to be at that hour. Tomas lay half upright, skin gray from oxygen debt, a circulatory patch shining at his throat. He was older than she had expected, with the slow eyes of a man who had spent decades trusting machinery more than institutions. You should be asleep, Rhea said. They told me you might be leaving. Not yet. He nodded toward the recorder on the bedside tray. Then listen while I still sound like myself. Rhea activated the unit. Tomas did not dramatize. That was what made him credible. He spoke in measured detail about the denial codes, the repeated assurances that inner ring access was imminent, and the way station control kept changing who held authority for the hold. He described one junior Veyra controller who whispered off record that premium lanes had been reserved for optics, not traffic. He described the moment he realized they were being left visible enough to worry the public, but not important enough to save quickly. Then he said the line that stayed with Rhea. They wanted us stranded, not dead. Dead would have been too clean. Stranded makes better politics. Rhea felt the truth of it at once. This whole affair had been designed for spectacle calibrated just short of catastrophe. Enough suffering to stain Earth. Not enough to force immediate moral clarity. When she left Med Bay, Lena was waiting in the corridor. There is more, Lena said. That phrase had become a curse. They returned to the suite. Lena brought up a hidden subledger tied to Veyra's station emergency reimbursements. Most entries were encrypted and beyond their access. One was not. It showed a pending request for loss equalization support to be released in the event of contractual interruption by human operator. Rhea read it twice. Date stamp. Filed 16 hours before Mercy hit Q collapse. Harlan stared at the screen. So they had the reimbursement request ready before the interruption existed. Yes, Lena said. Dr. Seema lowered herself into a chair very slowly. How many people are in on this? Rhea answered with the only honest line she had. Enough. Outside the suite, Veyra Station continued its artificial morning. Transit lights cycled. Freight crawlers moved. News feeds debated Earth's reliability. Somewhere, families in the nearest settlements were giving medicine to children who would never know how close that shipment had come to failing above an indifferent world. Rhea looked at the documents stacked before her and understood the real danger now. Not only that Earth would be blamed unfairly. That happened often enough. The deeper danger was precedent. If this case succeeded, the wider alliance would be able to bind humanity to endless emergency labor under the excuse of stability. And once systems learned they could survive by feeding on your decency, they almost never stopped on their own. Shortly after 4 in Veyra local time, the formal summons arrived. It came not from Quill and not from local arbitration. It came from the Secretariat of Trade Integrity under authority recognized by the Galaxy Council. The order named Officer Rhea Marlowe, acting human contract authority present during the Veyra disruption, and directed her to appear for public hearing at Halion Chamber within 43 standard hours. The case title was elegant in the way terrible things often were. Corridor Stability Review Concerning Human Suspension Conduct. Harlan read it over her shoulder. Suspension conduct. They even make accusation sound clean. Dr. Seema asked the question everyone else was avoiding. Can you refuse? Rhea shook her head. Not without giving them exactly what they want. Lena folded her arms hard across her chest. Then Earth send someone else. No, Rhea said. Why not? Because I was here. I refused the amendment. I opened the reserve. I ordered the override. I threatened Quill on record. Every real thing in this case runs through me. Harlan frowned. That is why you should not be the one. It is exactly why I should. He looked ready to argue. Then he stopped because he knew she was right. Anyone Earth sent in her place would begin at a disadvantage. Too detached. Too polished. Too easy for Vel to paint as political theater. Rhea was not theater. She was the ledger that had learned how to speak. She read the summons again and felt the old steadying instinct return, the one that always arrived when panic had exhausted its use. The chamber would expect defensiveness or outrage. Instead, she would give them the structure of the theft. Lena, she said, build 3 packets. 1 public, 1 chamber restricted, 1 dead man archived to Earth if our access is cut. Lena nodded at once. Harlan, secure every original Q log. No meter derivatives. I want provenance chains stamped and duplicated. Done. Dr. Seema, I need patient dependency reports from the nearest settlements. Not for pity, for consequence. Seema's mouth tightened. You will have them. Rhea drew a slow breath. There was still the matter of the widow and dependent reserve. If Vel found that before she framed it herself, he would use it to paint Earth as unstable, emotional, and financially compromised. If she hid it, he would tear it open later and make the hiding look like guilt. So there would be no hiding. She opened the reserve transfer file and moved it into the chamber-restricted packet. Lena noticed immediately. Are you sure? No, Rhea said. But secrecy is his tool, not ours. The station lights dimmed 1 degree as Veyra crossed into local dawn cycle. It gave the suite a bruised, colorless look. People on the public channels were still debating whether Earth had engineered the crisis, whether human operators had become too aggressive, and whether relief systems should ever depend so heavily on one species in the first place. That last question, at least, was honest. They should never have depended this heavily on one species. They had simply discovered that it was profitable to do so. Rhea gathered the first stack of printed logs, because there were still places in the galaxy where paper unnerved powerful liars more than data did. Paper had weight. Paper implied finality. When she lifted the stack, Lena touched her arm. Rhea, what? When you get to Helion, do not let them make this about whether you were rude to Quill. A tired breath escaped her nose. I was rude to Quill. You were alive to Quill. It is not the same. For the first time in many hours, Rhea smiled. Only a little, but enough. Then she said, help me build the bill. A few hours later, Rhea left Veyra on the shuttle to Helion. She had left the station behind, but not the case. The immediate emergency on Veyra was over. Now, the next task was simpler and harder at the same time. She had to reach Helion with the evidence intact and enough clarity to make the chamber look straight at it. The shuttle was civilian on paper and military in all the ways that mattered. It had plain walls, plain seats, and a crew that never used rank in the open cabin. Earth did not want the corridor seeing its anxiety. It only wanted Rhea delivered to the chamber with the evidence intact and enough sleep to speak in full sentences. She got neither. The packets took the entire departure window to finalize. Provenance chains had to be duplicated across hard storage and sealed prints. 3 witness statements came in late. One was from a Veyra controller who would not give a name, but described the ghost reservations as pre-approved pressure architecture. Another came from a dock union representative who had spent years watching Earth crews take extra loads under humanitarian waiver while Alliance vessels waited for premium compensation. The third was from a widow on Earth whose husband had died on the Seraphim run after an unpaid emergency extension. She wrote only 6 lines. They were enough. My husband was called flexible until the day he did not come home. If the chamber asks who paid the missing cost, tell them I did. Rhea read that statement twice in the shuttle, then closed the file and pressed thumb and forefinger against her eyes until the ache sharpened. Across from her sat Council Dane Pharaoh, the nearest thing Earth had managed to assign without turning the hearing into a formal diplomatic escalation. Pharaoh was not a celebrity advocate. That was why Rhea trusted him. He had the patience of a man who preferred facts to performance. He had introduced himself with a nod, 1 cup of bitter transport coffee, and the line, I am here to keep procedure from killing truth. Rhea liked him immediately. Now, halfway through transit, he was scanning the chamber packet with a face that revealed nothing. What? Rhea asked at last. You are not trying to prove innocence. No, that is wise. He turned another page. You are trying to prove dependency, transfer of burden, and intentional narrative shaping. Yes, also wise, but dangerous. Because chambers tolerate accident more readily than appetite. If you show them this system fed deliberately on human elasticity, many people in Helion will hear a policy problem. Others will hear an accusation against the architecture of the Alliance itself. Rhea stared out the shuttle window. The stars outside were sharp and unhelpful. That architecture came for us first. Pharaoh looked up. Do you want to win the hearing or embarrass the order that made the hearing necessary? Rhea considered the question. I want the order to stop pretending it is innocent. That is not the same as winning. No, she said. It is the only version of winning I trust. Pharaoh let the silence stand for a time. Then he tapped one page in the packet. The reserve transfer. Rhea did not feign confusion. Yes, they will use it. I know. They will say you dipped into family support funds to create political leverage. They will say whatever keeps the chamber from asking why no commercial reserve was left after 7 years of unbilled emergency service. Pharaoh studied her. You should let me introduce that document, not you. No, he raised an eyebrow. If it is hidden behind counsel, it sounds tactical, she said. If I carry it myself, it sounds like what it was. A bad choice made because every better choice had already been consumed. Pharaoh leaned back. That is almost eloquent. It is also true. He set the packet aside. Then when the moment comes, do not defend the transfer emotionally. Define the chain that made it necessary. I intend to. Good. He closed his eyes briefly. You realize Sorith Vel will not come at you as a villain. He never does. He will come at you as a steward. He will praise Earth. He will acknowledge sacrifice. Then he will ask whether a system of interdependent worlds can survive if one partner unilaterally abandons burden at a politically sensitive moment. Rhea's mouth flattened. He will call exploitation interdependence. Yes. He will call extortion continuity. Yes. He will call grief an unfortunate cost of scale. Pharaoh opened his eyes. He may. Then I will call things by their names. Do that carefully, Pharaoh said. People at Helion hear naming as threat when it reaches too close to truth. 13 hours later, the shuttle docked in Helion's lower civil wing. Helion Chamber was not a building in the traditional sense. It was a linked complex grown over generations around a council core, part court, part parliament, and part theater of legitimacy. From the outside, it looked restrained, almost humble. Inside, it was all perspective and hierarchy. Corridors widened toward power and narrowed toward service. Light fell gently on stone from unseen sources. Every surface suggested that order existed here because order deserved to exist. Rhea disliked places that looked so sure of themselves. They were met not by honor guards, but by protocol officers. In Helion, that was far more dangerous. Honor guards could embarrass you. Protocol officers could erase context around you until the room accepted a lie as procedure. One of them, tall and soft-voiced in the pale gray of chamber administration, extended a tablet. Officer Marlowe, Counsel Pharaoh, your witness, submission, and sequence allocations. Rhea skimmed the display. Her speaking window had been cut by 12 minutes. Pharaoh saw it too. We requested full evidentiary presentation. The chamber has adjusted for time balance across coalition concerns, the officer said. Coalition concerns, Pharaoh repeated flatly. Yes. Rhea scrolled further. The witness order had also changed. Sorith Vel would speak first on behalf of Corridor Stability Review, followed by Veyra Port Authority, then Trade Compliance Specialists. Earth's factual response came only after the initial framing had already been laid before the chamber and observer streams. They want the story set before I open my mouth, Rhea said. The officer inclined his head as if she had commented on the weather. Pharaoh said, we object. You may register that in docket addendum form 19. And the chamber will do what with it? Receive it. Pharaoh let out a soft breath that was not quite a laugh. Rhea signed a receipt anyway. Anger at doors was still anger wasted. They were escorted to an anteroom assigned to Earth's delegation. It was not insulting. That was the clever part. Nothing in Helion would be overtly insulting, because overt insult created sympathy. Instead, the room was merely smaller than the others, opening off the same corridor, with older furniture and limited display access. Respectable marginalization. Mercer appeared there an hour before the hearing. By secure hollow, cleaner now than on the Veyra line, but no more optimistic. Status, he asked. Speaking time reduced. Witness order rearranged. Narrative priority to Vel. Mercer nodded. Public blocks. Still drifting toward uncertainty, Pharaoh said. Which means they are available to whichever side sounds more structurally responsible. Mercer's gaze shifted to Rhea. How tired are you? Enough. Can you still think in sequence? Yes. That is all I need. Rhea almost asked whether Earth had built any coalition support overnight. She did not. If Mercer had it, he would have said so. Instead, she said, how hard are they leaning for continuity enforcement? Mercer's jaw tightened. Hard enough that some blocks are already discussing emergency designation if instability spreads. That will be the real disaster. If the corridors were declared emergency governed, Earth could be legally trapped back into service under imposed terms, all while the hearing pretended to examine fairness. Rhea said, then the chamber is not only deciding blame. No, Mercer said, it is deciding whether humanity can refuse to be used without being punished for the refusal. Pharaoh looked from one to the other. That line should not be spoken in there. I know, Mercer said, but it is the line. When the hollow cut, Rhea sat alone for several minutes while Pharaoh prepared the physical binders. She reviewed not the whole packet, but the opening path she had chosen. Not with the children, not with the dead, not even with the ghost reservations. With the simple question Vel could not answer honestly. If these routes were essential to Alliance stability, why had the price of keeping them alive been hidden in human loss instead of Alliance budgets? She repeated that question in her head until it lost all ornament and became what it was. A knife shaped like a ledger. The hearing chamber itself was not circular as people on public feeds often imagined. It was tiered and angled, built to create the illusion that everyone could see everyone equally while ensuring some voices always carried farther. Observers occupied the outer galleries. Press cubes hovered in restricted lanes high above, translating expressions into usable drama for worlds beyond. At the center stood the presentation floor, a shallow dark platform with 3 speaking stations. One for the chamber moderator, one for petitioners, one for respondents. Rhea walked to the respondent station as if she had the same right to be there as anyone in the room. That was deliberate. So was the plain dark suit she wore instead of formal Earth diplomatic colors. She had not come to symbolize civilization. She had come to count the cost of it. The moderator, Chancellor Ilias Turin, opened with polished language about public concern, interdependent corridors, and the necessity of clear review. Every phrase was balanced. Every phrase was bloodless. Then he recognized Soreth Vel. Vel rose from the petitioner station like a man attending a difficult but manageable meeting. He was taller than Rhea had expected, narrow-faced, silver-skinned, and gifted with the smooth stillness of someone who rarely had to raise his voice. Chancellor, he said, delegates, we gather under unfortunate conditions. Rhea felt Pharaoh shift beside her, barely. Vel went on. He praised Earth's long history of contribution. He praised human resilience. He praised the crews who had kept fragile lanes open under strain. Every compliment landed exactly where it should, softening the room and building the frame. Then he began to place the knife inside the kindness. Yet interdependence, he said, demands more than endurance. It demands continuity. Stability cannot survive if essential actors withdraw support in moments of heightened vulnerability, especially when vulnerable populations are aware that cargo urgency may be used to force contract restructuring. He spoke for 19 minutes and said almost nothing untrue in isolation. That was the craft. Earth had announced suspension. Yes. Veyra had experienced queue disruption. Yes. Public distress had increased because populations feared service interruption. Yes. Emergency interventions had then occurred under human direction using reserves not transparently disclosed in prior continuity planning. Also, yes, each stone was real. He simply arranged them into a wall built to trap meaning. Then came the turn that mattered. What concerns us is not whether humanity has value, Vel said. That is beyond dispute. What concerns us is whether essential corridor service can be governed by unilateral emotional pressure applied through selective rescue, timing, and retrospective narrative escalation. There it was. Emotional pressure, selective rescue, retrospective narrative escalation. He had translated decency into manipulation and exploitation into governance language. Vel concluded by requesting temporary continuity oversight and provisional review authority over suspended human routes until confidence in impartial service can be restored, which meant change dressed as oversight. The chamber thanked him. Quill spoke next, looking graver and more wounded than Rhea had seen him on Veyra. He claimed regret. He claimed urgency. He claimed that station management had struggled heroically amid Earth's abrupt hardline posture. He did not deny the Q revisions, only their intention. Misallocation under stress, he called them. A compliance specialist followed to explain how emergency reserves used by one partner could destabilize trust across the corridor, if not fully disclosed. Another witness suggested that Earth's long familiarity with hardship sometimes led human operators to make high-intensity moral judgments unsuited to multilateral systems. By the time the chamber turned to Earth, the trap had been fully upholstered. Pharaoh touched 2 fingers lightly against the podium, a signal to keep the opening clean. Rhea activated her station. She did not begin with protest. "My name is Rhea Marlowe," she said. "I serve Earth Freight Accord as Chief Contract Recovery Officer. I was present on Veyra Transfer Ring during the Q collapse, the medical delay, and the North Candle crew isolation. I refused a late amendment that would have converted emergency support into continuing obligation without lawful compensation. I authorized an override to save temperature-sensitive medicine. I authorized access escalation to reach a trapped Earth crew. Those facts are not in dispute." A few heads shifted. She had removed the thrill of confession. Now only structure remained. "What is in dispute," she said, "is what those facts mean." She let the room take that. "Petitioners have described instability caused by human withdrawal. I asked the chamber to examine a simpler question first. If these corridors are as essential as we all agree they are, why were they being held together by losses that never appeared in alliance budgets?" The room did not move. Not visibly, but attention changed shape. Rhea continued. "For 7 years, on the 3 routes under current review, Earth absorbed emergency freight costs, rescue diversions, maintenance overruns, spoilage risk, life support delay losses, and unpaid labor extensions under temporary humanitarian logic. Temporary repeated until it became structural. Structural remained hidden because the burden was distributed through the one partner expected to keep moving without public complaint." Vel's expression did not change. That almost pleased her. She called the first evidence stack to the chamber wall. Not the reserve. Not yet. Supplemental freight actions. Waiver activations. Unsettled reimbursements. Drift across 7 years. Numbers first, she said. Then the routes. Then the people under the numbers. Pharaoh passed her the witness queue. She called Dr. Seema Vey. Seema did not dramatize the Nair's settlements. That helped. She explained what the delayed medicine was for, how many patients were dependent, why the cooling window mattered, and why Veyra had been told that clearly ahead of time. When Pharaoh asked whether Earth had withheld the medicine to gain bargaining position, Seema answered with plain contempt. No, Earth forced it through after the station failed to move it. Quill's counsel tried to suggest the station had been managing simultaneous high-priority traffic. Pharaoh asked whether Seema had been notified of any genuine diplomatic courier hazard requiring lane preservation. She had not. Neither had any medical authority. The point landed. Rhea then called Harlan Cove. Harlan described the North Candle denial sequence without embellishment, which made it worse. We were left in holding pattern while access authority bounced between departments that Each claimed not to own the delay. And your conclusion? Pharaoh asked. That they wanted the crew exposed, but deniable. The petitioner's side objected. The moderators sustained it in part. Harlan nodded once and restated it. Operational impression, based on 17 years of tug work in Alliance ports. The pattern was deliberate enough to keep us worried, but muddy enough to deny. That remained in the record. Rhea watched the chamber carefully while the testimony unfolded. The upper arc of trade delegates remained guarded. The neutral blocks were listening harder now. That was why Vel moved sooner than expected. He requested cross-examination before Earth's full evidentiary sequence. Turn allowed it. Of course he did. Vel turned toward Rhea with what could almost have passed for sympathy. Officer Marlowe, you have presented long-standing strain. No one denies strain. But is it not also true that Earth continued accepting these contracts year after year? Yes, Rhea said. So, Earth consented. No. A murmur passed through one of the observer arcs. Vel's tone remained calm. You signed. You served. You renewed. In ordinary commercial language, that is consent. Rhea answered just as calmly. On paper, yes. In practice, it became dependency. The system learned that if others stepped back, Earth would still move to save lives. Then that expectation was used against us. Vel gave a tiny tilt of the head. Strong language. Accurate language. He changed tack at once. Let's be very careful, then. When Veyra's queues collapsed, did you or did you not deploy restricted reserve resources outside ordinary corridor planning? I did, without prior coalition disclosure. Yes. And did you do so after refusing a continuity amendment designed to protect population from service interruption? Designed to make unpaid emergency service permanent, Rhea said. That is your interpretation. No, she said. That is the effect. He let that hang, then asked the question he had clearly prepared for maximum effect. Officer Marlowe, is it true that the reserve you accessed included protected support funds for widows and dependents of deceased Earth crews? There it was. The chamber shifted more visibly this time. Rhea did not look to Pharaoh. She did not lower her eyes. She touched the station and brought the transfer file onto the wall herself. Yes, she said. Vel folded his hands. Then please explain to the chamber why a professional continuity officer, claiming to defend structural responsibility, chose to dip into bereavement protection in order to intervene in a politically charged corridor dispute. That was his shape for it. Not necessity. Choice. Not rescue. Intervention. Not life. Politics. Rhea answered in the order she had rehearsed. Because no commercial emergency reserve remained with lawful release speed. She brought up the preceding chain. 7 years of absorbed losses. Deferred reimbursements. Maintenance cannibalization. Emergency action without recovery. Now the reserve depletion was no longer a moral anecdote. It was the endpoint of a line. The widow and dependent reserve was touched, she said, because every cleaner buffer had already been used to keep these routes alive before the chamber ever decided they were worth noticing. Vel's voice stayed soft. You understand how that sounds. Yes, that is why I am not hiding it. He paused just briefly. He had expected defensiveness. Shame. A flicker of concealment he could widen into distrust. Instead, she had carried the wound out herself and made the chamber look at what had caused it. He recovered quickly. Or perhaps, he said, you are using a tragic fund to morally blackmail the room. Rhea felt something inside her go still. No, she said. I am reminding the room who has been paying. Silence. Not total. Never total in Hell Ion. But enough. She called the widow's statement to the wall. Not the name. Just the words. My husband was called flexible until the day he did not come home. If the chamber asks who paid the missing cost, tell them I did. Rhea let the sentence remain visible while she spoke. You have heard the language today. Continuity, stability, confidence, interdependence. These are fine words. But on these routes, in these records, those words became hull stress, unbilled labor, delayed family support, dead technicians exhausted. Crews and civilian rescue work pushed off Alliance ledgers and into human life. No one interrupted. If the chamber wishes to rule that lawful suspension is forbidden because others built survival on our willingness to absorb loss, it may do so. But let the record state clearly what it is ruling. Not cooperation, not trust. Dependence purchased by moving the hidden price into the bodies and households of one species. Turin called for order, though no one had shouted. Veyra requested a brief recess for evidentiary review. Turin denied it. That mattered. It meant momentum had shifted enough that delay now looked partisan. The hearing moved into restricted submission. Now the room turned away from public pace and into evidence. Rhea opened the deeper packet. Ghost reservations. The pre-filed loss equalization request. The timing conflict between the accusation package and the real alarms. Internal authorization marks linked to trade oversight review. Not proof of some grand theatrical conspiracy. Something more believable and more poisonous. A chain of people each smoothing the path for harm under the assumption that no one would ever force the whole line into view. Pharaoh presented provenance. Lena, by remote authenticated testimony, walked the chamber through the Q manipulation logs with merciless clarity. The lane board was not merely altered, Lena said. It was sculpted. Real traffic was displaced by premium placeholders configured to create congestion optics and legal pressure points. Quill tried to object that station management often created holding buffers during uncertainty. Pharaoh asked why. Then, a reimbursement request for interruption caused by human operator conduct had been pre-filed 16 hours before the interruption existed. Quill's counsel objected to characterization. Turin allowed the exhibit. Quill's face changed, only slightly, but Rhea saw it. He had expected deniability to remain diffuse. He had not expected the lines to converge this tightly. Veyra rose again, and this time the courtesy had thinned. Officer Marlowe, he said, even if the chamber accepts the possibility of opportunistic station handling, you still have not disproven the central threat. Essential corridors suffered because Earth announced suspension in a climate of known fragility. Rhea answered immediately. No. Essential corridors suffered because fragility had been hidden inside us for years. He paced one step, the first open sign that he felt pressure. Let us say that were partly true. What would you have the Alliance do? Price every emergency at full speculative loss? Route compassion through invoice committees while settlements starve? There was some low approval from one side arc. A clever framing. Compassion versus accounting. Rhea took the bait and turned it. I would have the Alliance stop calling exploitation compassion, she said. A sharper stir moved through the room. She called up the route map. These 3 corridors did not remain open because the system was fair. They remained open because Earth crews accepted impossible loads, because human managers patched recurring gaps under moral pressure, and because whenever a settlement stood one missed shipment away from disaster, the practical question was not what the Alliance could sustain. It was whether humanity would carry one more exception. She enlarged the lines until the map looked like veins across dark space. This is not a complaint about helping people. Earth helped people. We will help people again. The issue before the chamber is whether our willingness to do what was decent has been converted into a permanent mechanism for shifting cost away from those who designed the corridor and onto those who were easiest to guilt. Bell stepped toward the center line of the floor. You speak as if your species alone understands sacrifice. Rhea shook her head. No, I speak as if my species knows what it feels like when sacrifice stops being honored and starts being budgeted. That line moved through the room like a current. The moderator called for closing sequences. Bell used his time well. He warned against destabilizing the corridor through emotional moralization. He urged measured review. He argued that no interstellar system could function if every difficult compromise were recast as predation. He even conceded that Earth deserved fuller compensation mechanisms going forward. Going forward. Always that phrase. As if the dead lived only behind the chamber and justice existed only ahead of it. Then Earth took the final response slot. Pharaoh asked Rhea whether she wanted to close or whether Council should. She said, I will. He nodded once and stepped back. Rhea did not try to outshine Vel. She did not dramatize the dead. She did not raise her voice. The petitioner asked the chamber to fear instability, she said. So do I. I fear the kind of instability that grows when entire populations discover their safety relied on hidden losses borne by people they were invited to call partners while treating them as exhaust. She turned slightly toward the delegate arcs. No one here needs to decide whether Earth is noble. That is not the task. The task is simpler. Did alliance structures allow essential relief lanes to survive by placing recurring unpaid burdens on one species? Did station and trade authorities know those burdens existed? Did some among them prepare to turn a lawful human withdrawal into a public morality case before the incident at Veyra had even fully unfolded? She let the documents remain visible. If the answer is yes, then the chamber is not choosing between stability and outrage. It is choosing whether to continue stability built on a lie. She ended not with defiance, but with demand. Earth asked for three things. First, immediate suspension of continuity enforcement tied to the disputed corridors. Second, independent forensic review of hidden burden transfer across all three routes. Third, public recognition that lawful refusal to absorb unrecovered emergency cost is not sabotage. She rested both hands on the station. And one more thing. If this chamber still wishes to speak of interdependence, let interdependence mean shared cost, shared risk, and shared truth. Not one species paying the hidden difference until the day it finally says enough. The chamber recessed. Only then did Rhea feel the shake in her legs. She stepped off the respondent floor and followed Pharaoh into the anteroom, where the silence was smaller and somehow harder to breathe in. You move them, Pharaoh said. That is not the same as winning. No, he said, but it is the only reason winning stays possible. Mercer came through secure hollow before either of them sat down. Public blocks are shifting, he said without greeting. Dock unions in two sectors are backing independent review. Nearest settlement councils have issued a statement. Trade delegates are splitting. Rhea leaned against the wall, which means the chamber will try to split the ruling. Probably, Mercer said. A secure tone interrupted him. Lena was already pushing a file through from Veyra. Rhea straightened. They were in the anteroom. Pharaoh was beside her. Mercer remained on hollow. Lena's file was partial, scrubbed, and still readable. One line stood out at once. If Human Route Authority refuses continuity amendment, allow interruption optics to mature before concession. Pharaoh read it once and swore under his breath. Mercer's voice dropped. Can you authenticate? Not cleanly, Lena said. Clean enough. Origin chain is damaged because they tried to erase it. Rhea looked at the line and understood at once what it did. The hearing had already shown hidden burden and manipulated timing. This line showed something worse. The suffering had not merely been tolerated. It had been allowed to ripen until it became useful. When do we resume? She asked. 18 minutes, Pharaoh said. Mercer said, do not send it public first. Put it before the chamber. Rhea nodded. If they released it wide, Vel would call it theater. If the chamber saw it first, burying it would stain the ruling itself. When the session resumed, Chancellor Turin began to summarize preliminary findings in careful language. Recognized strain. Procedural concern. Need for review. Danger of corridor instability. The kind of ruling that would have preserved appearances and changed very little. Then Pharaoh stood. Chancellor, he said, Earth requests limited reopening on newly authenticated restricted evidence bearing directly on petitioner intent. Vel objected at once. Improper timing. Pharaoh answered. Improper timing would describe preparing interruption optics before the interruption. That phrase alone altered the room. Tedin hesitated, then granted the submission. Rhea called the fragment to the wall. It read, if Human Route Authority refuses continuity amendment, allow interruption optics to mature before concession. The chamber went still. Veldikovert fost. Context incomplete. Then provide context, Rhea said. He did not. Quill half rose, then sat when his counsel caught his sleeve. Rhea went on before anyone else could reclaim the frame. You have heard throughout this review that Earth created instability through selective rescue. This record shows station-linked oversight discussing whether visible interruption should be allowed to intensify after a refused amendment. Not resolved, not reduced, allowed to mature. The chamber may decide later how far intent reached, but it cannot honestly call this neutral stress management. Turin ordered chamber verification. The technicians took less than 10 minutes to confirm core signature compatibility. Not enough for criminal conviction. More than enough for public consequence. That was all the room needed. Vel made one last attempt to retreat into principle. Systems were complex. Fragments misled. Local actors misunderstood guidance. Essential corridors still needed continuity. But the earlier ease had left his voice. He could still sound reasonable. He could no longer sound untouched. When the ruling came, it was neither perfect nor small. The chamber denied continuity enforcement on the disputed routes. It suspended consortium self-auditing authority across the 3 corridors under review. It ordered an independent forensic accounting of hidden burden transfer, and it entered into public record that lawful human refusal to absorb unrecovered emergency cost did not constitute sabotage of alliance stability. Then came the line that mattered most. The chamber found credible cause to investigate whether corridor distress at Veyra had been allowed to intensify for coercive negotiation effect. Not storybook victory, but the wall had cracked in public. Rhea stood still while the translations rolled across the chamber panels. She did not feel triumph. She felt a loosening, painful and honest, as if she had been bracing against a wait for so long that release itself came a strain. Vel reserved objection and left by the petitioner corridor without looking toward Earth Station. Quill left faster. Pharaoh touched Rhea's elbow lightly. "It is over. This part is," she answered. Outside the chamber, reporters called after her. Rhea gave them only one line. "Earth will keep helping people," she said, "but help will not be mistaken for surrender again." Mercer met them in a lower transit lounge beneath the public galleries. "You did what I asked," he said. "Only what you asked." "No," he said. "More than that." He handed her a sealed Earth Freight Accord confirmation. Her emergency use of the Widow and Dependent Reserve had been upheld, and any settlement would replenish it first. "They watched the hearing," Mercer said. "They understand why it happened." Rhea put the notice away. It meant the people who bore the loss had not been abandoned just to make Earth look neat before the galaxy. Pharaoh stood by the lounge glass, watching shuttles rise from Helion's lower docks. This ruling will frighten several blocks. Some because they were guilty, others because they were merely comfortable. Comfortable was enough, Mercer said. A message came in from Veyra. Dr. Seema reported that the second medicine run had reached Neris on time. Harlan added that North Candle's engineer still thought Rhea talked like an invoice with bad manners. Lena said station workers had started calling Lane 7 the Marlowe corridor. Rhea told them to stop. Lena refused. Then the line went dead and the lounge fell quiet again. Mercer looked at her. The galaxy heard the receipt. "That is all I wanted," she said. Mercer shook his head. "No, what you wanted was for them to say it out loud. That was the real change. Stability had a hidden payer, and now the galaxy had heard the bill read in public. Back on Earth, there were no parades. There were debriefs, family calls, and settlement councils asking the only practical question. Would Earth still help? Yes, Rhea said, but the terms would change. She spent the next week turning Helion's language into structure. Shared risk clauses, reserve transparency, mandatory, disclosure of burden transfer on essential aid lanes. A few nights later, she went to the Memorial Hall near the old Pacific Orbital Terminal. Names filled the wall in ordered lines. Pilots, mechanics, loadmasters, route coordinators. 27 from a disputed routes alone. 27 reasons she had refused to let Helion describe the matter as a misunderstanding in stress conditions. A maintenance custodian arrived near closing and recognized her from the public feeds. He hesitated, then asked the question in the plain way ordinary people often cut through layers others lived inside. "So what changed?" Rhea looked back at the wall before she answered. "The law moved a little," she said. "The record moved more. From now on, When they want human labor, human risk, or human rescue outside the contract, they will have to ask in the light. The man nodded slowly. Good. After he left, she remained alone with the names. Outside, freight still moved above Earth in silent lines. Somewhere beyond the sky, a port manager who would once have leaned on human decency was now checking a budget twice. Small changes by the scale of empires. Not small by the scale of a household waiting for someone to come home. Rhea touched the cool wall beside one of the names without resting her hand on the letters themselves. We got part of it back, she said softly. Not enough. Never enough. But part. When she stepped out into the rain-washed city, the lift lines above the terminal shone faintly through the clouds. Earth looked the way it always looked from the inside. Busy, tired, imperfect, still making itself. Not easy to break. That, more than anything, was what Helion had been forced to recognize. Humanity could be cornered, delayed, mispriced, and used by systems clever enough to hide behind procedure. But it was not mute. And once it had finally spoken in ledgers, names, and language no chamber could prettify, even the largest order in the settled galaxy had been made to pause. Because for the first time, before the whole galaxy, the hidden price had a face and a voice that did not ask permission to be heard. That voice was named Rhea Marlowe. In the end, the galaxy did not change because Earth begged for mercy. It changed because one woman walked into that chamber carrying the truth no one else wanted to name. She did not ask the chamber to admire humanity. She forced it to face what it had spent years ignoring, that comfort, order, and peace had been built on sacrifices no one intended to repay. That is what makes humanity dangerous to every empire that mistakes patience for weakness. We endure. We carry more than anyone sees. And when the day comes to speak, we do not arrive empty-handed. We arrive with memory. We arrive with proof. And sometimes we arrive with the bill. If this story stayed with you, make sure to like this video, share it with someone who still believes humanity's greatest strength is not power, but dignity, and subscribe to the channel for more science fiction stories where Earth stands its ground against the galaxy. Because out there, among empires, councils, and cold machines of power, one truth remains. Humanity is not easy to silence, and it is never cheap to break.